شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. This is study number 15 of the Ramadan daily Quran studies for the year 2021, presented by the Anjuman Ishat Islam Lahore, UK, and I am Zahid Aziz, the compiler of these studies. The topic of this study is that the Holy Prophet Muhammad was granted the abundance of good, or what the Holy Quran calls Al-Qasr, or Al-Qasr as is the more proper pronunciation. So I'll just go through this very short, well-known chapter of the Holy Quran, chapter 108. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر, which translates as, surely we have given you, meaning the Holy Prophet, abundance of good. So pray to your Lord and sacrifice. Surely your enemy is cut off from all good. This is a very early revelation addressed to the Holy Prophet. And like chapter 94 discussed in the last study, this was also revealed when the Holy Prophet possessed nothing. He had nothing and was entirely helpless. Verse 1, surely we have given you abundance of good, Al-Qasr. It states in the most certain and powerful terms that God has granted him this abundance, Al-Qasr, by which is meant the abundance of good things. And those good things granted to the Holy Prophet by God included that he was promised the triumph of his religion of Islam over all religions. He was granted help against his enemies, and for his own community, he was granted this intercession, being able to intercede with God on their behalf. And in fact, he was granted so much of goodness of all kinds that it cannot really be counted or measured. And what was bestowed to him in this regard was in such great measure that it was not granted in that measure to any other human being before him or after him. And some of the things he was granted abundantly were both spiritual and worldly rule over a nation, honor and renown, devotion he received from his followers, nobility, noble behavior, nobility and refined culture, and the highest of morals. And the prophecy that he would be granted all this prophecy, Natana Kalkasar, was made when he started his mission. And he was alone and helpless. And there was no visible chance or prospect that he would make any headway at all with his mission. And verse 2, so pray to your Lord and sacrifice. And this makes it clear, the wording of the verse, that it is not only the Holy Prophet alone who is addressed and who is promised this abundance of good, but also every true follower of his who makes use of the means of getting that abundance of good. He or she is promised it. And the two ways to attain this abundance of good promised in the first verse, the two ways are praying to God and sacrifice. And sacrifice means the devoting of one's life to the good of humanity. Now, prayer is a way of communicating with God, and it raises in a person's heart the highest of aspirations and ambitions of what he wants to achieve. And prayer makes him focus deeply on the attributes of God. And those attributes of God then become his model to follow. If there is no aspiration, no desire in the heart for good, then it is simply impossible to do any good in practice. So this is why prayer is mentioned first. And when these noble aspirations and ambitions arise in the heart, a person should be willing to give or sacrifice even his whole life for the service of humanity. And this is not the service of one group or one nation or one community that he aspires to serve, but the humanity itself is what he aspires to serve. The Holy Prophet's own life was the perfect example of prayer and sacrifice. And as the next verse shows, the next verse which I'm going to quote, not the next verse in the chapter, as the next verse which I'm going to quote shows, his prayer and sacrifice occupied his entire life, even unto death. And he is instructed in the Holy Quran to declare to the world, and I will read a verse here in translation, in fact, two verses. My prayer and my sacrifice and my life and my death are surely for Allah, the Lord of the worlds. No partner has he. And this is what I am commanded. And I am the first of those who submit. Awalul Muslimin. And this is chapter 6, verses 162 to 163. So through leading such a life, where his prayer, sacrifice, life and death are entirely for Allah, he becomes the first and foremost of those who submit to God. He becomes the one who is ahead of everyone else, who is the number one in submitting to God. And this is the highest rank of being a Muslim that the Holy Prophet ﷺ became through his prayer and sacrifice. And prayer and sacrifice are bound together. So when you say Allahu Akbar to start your prayer, that Allahu Akbar is to indicate that you are cutting off all your connections with this world, just like an animal being sacrificed. You're cutting off all connection with the world. And then for the prayer itself, you sacrifice your time, you sacrifice your desire to do other things which you could do in that time. And people even are sacrificing a little bit of their earning and their livelihood by devoting that time to prayer. So that involves sacrifice. Then once the prayer is over, then for it to be a perfect prayer, it requires sacrifice in your daily activities. Otherwise, you are only uttering words of service to God in prayer, but not carrying out that prayer in practice. Similarly, when you have sacrifice, then for that sacrifice to be perfect, it requires prayer to God, to ask him that your sacrifice may be accepted by him. And the sacrifices, these prayers that your sacrifice is accepted, those prayers themselves can only be accepted if the sacrifice was sincere and not for show. It was not for show or for making a name for yourself, getting fame, or for some other personal motive. And the last verse of this short chapter, Inna Shaniaka Huwal Abtar, your enemy is cut off. And the meaning is cut off from good. And the word for cut off is abtar. And abtar applies to a person or people from whom all good is cut off, so that they leave behind them no good mention of them. There is no one to take their place, no one to remember them, no one to continue their work, no one to follow their example. And literally, it's also applied to a person who doesn't leave any offspring behind, any physical successes behind. And this verse refuted the allegations of the opponents of the Holy Prophet. And their allegation was that as he had no male offspring, therefore his name and mission would come to an end after him. He would have no successor to continue his name or mission. And this verse contains a prophecy that it is his enemies who would be cut off and leave no successors to continue their work or name. And that the Holy Prophet would be blessed with spiritual offspring till the day of judgment, because he is the one who's been granted Al-Qasr, and it's his opponents who are abtar or cut off. And this, of course, proved true during the life of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, when what happened was that the next generation who were descended from his enemies, they did not follow in their father's footsteps, but instead of that, they became Muslims. And this spiritual offspring of the Holy Prophet, his spiritual progeny, continues to exist till now. And if this spiritual progeny of his, in other words, people calling themselves Muslims, if they work to present a true picture of Islam and a true picture of its Holy Prophet to the world, then the next generation of the present day opponents, the next generation of the present day current opponents of Islam might well become admirers and well wishers of Islam, so that then the present day opponents also become abtar and cut off, leaving no successor behind. That is the end of study number 15. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quranil Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim. Innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malakum barur rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.